Cayuga, Ontario is a small village in Haldimand County, and it's home to a company that is working on a big problem. True North Tiny Homes is focused on building compact housing solutions in compact places.
I grew up in construction. My dad was in construction since he was 16. He would be in his 70s now if he was still around. So grew up doing that. I didn't want to work with my dad, so I went to school for civil engineering. Ended up working with my dad. But it was great. We had a good time. But we did a lot of larger construction type stuff. And we sold a design contract and a build contract. And after the 2008 downfall, we were looking for different ways to market. And I thought, well, instead of a design contract and a build contract, why don't we make a design company and a build company? And so I started a design company. But I wasn't then just doing designs for my dad's company. I was doing designs for all kinds of people. And that led to a lot of apartment type stuff. People not being able to afford a mortgage, so they would buy a house and then get me to design a basement apartment so they could supplement their income and pay for their mortgage. And that grew over time, and I thought, it would be so much easier than changing all these houses around would just be to pre-build a house and drop it in your backyard. So in 2018, when Toronto and Hamilton, both within 2 weeks of each other, voted in favor of talking about laneway house bylaws, I said, that's it, now's the time to incorporate. So we started True North Tiny Homes.
The first home was built in 2018 before municipal bylaws for the project had even been conceived, so the company toured different home shows to display Dan's creation. Since then, the political landscape has shifted and bylaws were created and recreated, and in some municipalities, it became easier to obtain a building permit than ever before.
So there's no real legal definition for the term tiny home. And so we built the first few on trailers because the bylaws weren't in place yet, so they could be kind of brought into a farmer's field. We would build the actual structure to Ontario Building Code so that when the bylaws were around, people would be able to get a building permit. But we put it on a trailer so they could move it if they needed to. And then over time, as the bylaws got easier, we built less and less on trailers, so the percentages of trailers kept dropping until 2022, I'd say 100% of them were on foundations. I'll still build one on a trailer if someone wants it, kind of as a cottage or something like that. Primarily, we're focused on building Ontario Building Code compliant small houses, which means it has to be on a foundation.
The method of building a tiny home is pretty much how one builds a regular one. Clients come in with ideas, and Dan designs the structure. The structure is stick-framed, then wired for electricity, plumbing added, insulating drywall secured to the walls. Interior additions are fitted into place, giving the new owner opportunity for personal flourish. The siding one sees on any house is the same as what goes onto this tiny version.
I like to say anyone could build a big house. You just got lots of empty space you can play around with. It takes a bit of skill to build something a little bit smaller. And you'd be amazed, where every stud goes matters, because if it's in the wrong spot, it's going to be in the way of something, because there's something everywhere in here.
Servicing that goes into this house is the same as the larger versions we're used to, but when the house is put into a backyard, the rules change a bit.
So every time we have to upgrade the water line to the main house. Sometimes we have to upgrade the hydro. And I've never had to run into where we have to upgrade the gas line or the sewer line. But everything gets to the main house so that it's enough capacity to handle both houses.
They must dig a trench from the corner of the basement of the main house to the tiny house location in the backyard. All services are buried in that trench, so everything the tiny house needs is run from the main house and not the street. Because there is no heated basement underneath to keep those toesies warm, True North installs a combination boiler. So not only does the occupant have hot water in the faucets, but also in the floor, heating the tiny home from the floor up. Months later, this tiny home is move-in ready, and the appeal for compact living is growing.
So when we first started building tiny homes, we figured that our biggest market would be younger people looking to get into the housing market. But what we found through a multitude of different issues that younger people run into is they can't actually afford a tiny home. I know that sounds weird, but it's harder to get financing on a small house in a backyard. So unless you have the cash to pay for it, it gets kind of hard to get the financing through. So we found out kind of by accident that our primary market is actually the older generation moving into their kids' backyards, or creating a home in their own backyard and their kids are moving into the main house so that they can be close to their grandkids. And this works on a multitude of different levels as well, because as people age, they might need a bit of care, or they're looking towards a future where they might need a bit of care in the future, but they still want to maintain their independence. And so by moving into a backyard and having family members live really close, it really helps in all of those avenues all at the same time. Not to mention that there's a huge wait list on getting into retirement homes where you might be closer to care if you need it, and how much those things cost. You could pay for a tiny home fairly quickly.
Because of those long wait lists for retirement homes, the company was recently approached by an agency which is passionate about bringing healthcare into the homes of our older population.
This lady called me up a few months ago, actually, and she's been working with seniors and providing care for them, and came to housing through that, realizing that there's not enough spaces, or the wait list for the retirement homes is so long. And so she's been bringing healthcare into homes, but the homes are not always the right homes for seniors. So she called me and said, why don't we partner up with her two companies? So I'm now partnering up with Michelle of Adding Value to Seniors, and we're looking at different ways to market this as a white glove service, where we are actively looking to help the older generation in whatever way we can. And sometimes that'll have to do with housing, and sometimes it'll have to do with healthcare, and sometimes it'll have to do with real estate, and sometimes it'll have to do with all of it all together.
I love the idea of a tiny home. I think it gives a senior many options. I think it gives them back their identity, their ability to have something on their own. I believe it's affordable. It's another way of feeling like they don't have to go to retirement. And I'm hoping providing healthcare with the tiny home is going to solve that problem.
If my dad could have lived in a tiny home in the backyard, that would have been awesome. Or if I could live in a tiny home in his backyard, that would have been good too. Like, he had a big enough property for that.
It's a tiny home that offers some big possibilities, proudly made in Ontario.